Right. You know what we're talking about. For some of you who have been away, we had an election, we have a new mayor-elect, and we have an old problem dealing with the city's budget. Ergo, therefore, we have the current budget director, Eugene Munin. Give him a hand. By the way, it's a city club tradition. If you want to stack the audience, perfect. No problem whatsoever. We have the head of the Civic Federation, Laurence Msall. And we have the commentator, Mr. Blog, from Crane Chicago Business, Greg Hinz. Feel like they're running for office. Who knows? All right, so the way this is going to work, I'll give Mr. Munin to set the table. I'll give Mr. Msall a chance to clear the table, and I'll give Mr. Hinz a chance to see if the table's there in the first place. So, Mr. Munin, take 7-10 minutes, a couple extra minutes for your posters. What's the status of the City of Chicago's budget as of today?
Thank you for inviting me, first of all. This is actually the first time that I've ever been introduced. I've been here many times. I've never been introduced before. In fact, a few years ago, I was here, and everybody at my table got introduced except me. And one guy was from the mosquito abatement district. So it was kind of embarrassing. So I've obviously peaked here, and I'm thinking that I may just have to resign on or about May 16th.
Mr. Munin, sympathy does not get you anywhere here, so go ahead.
But no, thanks again. I'd like to thank the mayor for giving me this great opportunity, and some people that I'm with here today, Chief Staff Ray Orozco, Gene Saffold, who's not here. You need a very good sense of humor in this business, and they have it, fortunately. And two people that are here that don't get a lot of credit but deserve it, Ann McNabb and Andrea Gibson are also here. With respect to the budget, I'm going to talk about a couple of things, and then we'll sure be open for some lively conversation and dialogue after that. The last 3 years have been very difficult for the city of Chicago. That's not a secret. It has been a challenge given the dramatic drop in revenues that we saw. We lost about $1 billion, give or take, in revenue, $300 to $400 million a year because of the recession. And if you go back and look at it, you will see that unemployment almost doubled in the state of Illinois. It was over 11% at one point in time. It's lower now. In the city of Chicago, it's higher than that. And we've also seen, as I said, this drop in revenues. When people aren't working, then they're not paying taxes, they're not buying things, they're not paying income tax, and those are our largest shares of revenue that the state shares with us. So that caused the problem. The way we approached it was to look at the expense side of the budget, as we have to. And you can see on the chart over here on my left, your right, the big drop in headcount that we've seen in the last 10 years and significantly in the last 2 or 3 years. We've lost about 6,000 employees. We didn't lose them. We know where they are, but they're not working for the city of Chicago anymore. And that was the way we approached it. Now, could you do more? Yes, and we would continue to do that. We would continue to take a look at it, but I don't think we get quite the credit we deserve. I mean, a lot of the headcount reduction would have occurred before we even announced a preliminary budget deficit. So the fact that we haven't replaced 800 police officers in the last 2 years is a big deal. That saves us a lot of money. Now, that has its consequences also. Not a lot of people are happy with that, but that is something that we took a serious look at, and we tried to find ways to put police officers out there on the street without hiring them, and we did that. We have about 325, I think, is the number of police officers that we had doing administrative work in the last year and a half or so that we put out on the street. So we have not hired police officers, very many anyway, and we have been able to find police officers already on the force. And I would also agree with what Acting Superintendent Hillard has done recently, and that is to take some of these specialized units that we have and put them back in a squad car so that they're answering 911 calls. Beyond that, we did do some other things, some of which were popular, some weren't. I mean, we restructured some debt. Again, interest rates were fairly low, and so that seemed to be a prudent, responsible thing to do. We also dipped into the TIF pool of funds that we have, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But that was a somewhat controversial thing to do. TIFs are controversial, and I'll give a little more detail on that. And then last but not least, we took some money in 2011, $120 million is scheduled to be taken out of the parking meter long-term reserve. And there's been a lot of discussion on that. Just to give you, a picture of where we are with the parking meter reserves, we had $250 million in the long-term reserves that we were scheduled to take out in 2010. We actually, when we saw that things were doing a little bit better, because we've been fairly conservative in our revenue estimates. We've done a very good job on that, I believe. And revenue estimates were coming in a little bit better last year than we had anticipated. So when we went out with the budget last year, we announced that we would not need about $60 million of the 250. So we were going to borrow 250, went down to 190. And as you may know, because I'm sure you're as riveted to these announcements as I am, we announced about 2 weeks ago that we would put $50 million back in the reserves from the remaining 190. So we ended up borrowing about $140 million from the reserves in 2010. Again, much better than we thought. Our preference would have been to not borrow at all, of course, but the arithmetic here is pretty simple, actually. Either you're going to raise taxes or you're going to dramatically cut services. And for me, and anybody who knows the budget, it's police, fire, and to a much lesser extent, streets and sanitation. The police department and the fire department alone are about $1.9 billion out of our $3.3 billion. So I just think about, people are sometimes more familiar with the federal government and their budget. You take out Social Security, you take out Medicare, you take out whatever the federal government pays for Medicaid and matching, you take out defense, and you have to balance the budget on the rest of it. And you're left with about, 25% of the budget, and it's just very difficult to do. So that's how we approached 2011, and our hope is, again, we have had very conservative estimates for 2010, 2011. We're just now getting some information in on 2011. It looks pretty good. I mean, our estimates are increases of about 2 to 3% for sales and income tax and real property transfer tax, and we're doing slightly better than that. We can see it's continuing the trend that we saw in the fourth quarter of 2010, and ideally, the $120 million that we were looking to take out in 2011, maybe we won't need all of that. And by the way, so we will have left at least $125 million in the parking meter long-term reserve out of the 400. And as you know, the $500 million from the Skyway Reserve is still there. So $625 million in reserves is something a lot of other cities, I think, would like to have. Let me just touch on two other quick topics here. I mentioned TIFs. TIFs are a very important economic tool. They've done very well for the city of Chicago. We've taken $800 million, or will take $800 million, and use that to build new schools with. There are affordable housing programs that we've done. There's job training, in addition to the private development deals. The vast majority of this all goes through city council. So I kind of react to this is all done in a smoke-filled room. It's not. I mean, most of these, certainly the larger projects, when we build a school or a police station or a firehouse, that's an intergovernmental agreement that goes to the city council. If there's a redevelopment agreement, that goes to the city council. The things that don't go to the city council are, maybe a street resurfacing or something like that, or lighting an award, the alderman request. And we put all of, in the context of transparency, there is so much information about TIFs on the web that I almost think maybe it's too much, and that's the problem. I mean, we have the redevelopment plans, we have redevelopment agreements, we have the projection reports, we have the audited financial statements. Now in our budget, we put in there line by line what our positions are there. We put in the income and expenditure for every TIF. We could always do more, and I know Laurence is often offering to us suggestions about that, and we really try and listen to that and try and make it as easily accessible for people as we possibly can, because it's really in our best interest. I think when people hear the TIF story, then they, a lot of the reactions, I didn't really understand that. To wit, TIFs do not divert funds from public schools, okay? I will say that, and I'm going to give you my email address because somebody's going to have a question about that afterwards. I'm going to say, yeah, you're wrong about that. So my email address is ann.mcnabb no, I'm on. Eugene.munin@cityofchicago.org. You might want to do that before May 16th if you have a question. TIFs do not divert funds from the public schools. Why do I say that? Because the public schools levy what they levy, okay? They're governed by the tax cap legislation that really all government bodies are. If you're home rule, you aren't, but the city adopted the same legislation for ourselves. So if a TIF did not exist, that money would not automatically go into the public schools. The public schools have to decide what their levy is, and then they levy it, they make a decision. Sometimes the public schools have levied up to the cap, sometimes they haven't. That's a decision that they make when they put the budget out. But this is just a canard that the money that is going into a TIF that's being used for these economic development projects would otherwise have just gone into public schools. That's just not true. So we can maybe get some questions about that and explain it further. I know Laurence understands this and has written a number of very thoughtful position papers on it. So, so I mentioned that, and then I would also, the last topic is pension. The state has weighed in on this. Obviously, there's a pension problem. There's a funding problem. We are... and there are some vested interest people here that, with respect to the pension, there's a constitutional protection, Article 13, Section 5 of the Illinois Constitution. You can check that out. But the fact of the matter is, the city's funding mechanism is different than the other pension funds in the state. It was established years ago. When it was established, it made sense, the funding mechanism that we have. All we do, we pay a percentage of payroll, actually a multiplier of payroll. That's how we make our pension contribution. It's what the state tells us to do. We can't unilaterally change that. We have followed the law. We've always made our pension contributions. The pension contributions by employees and employer, in this case the city, have not been enough. There's a number of reasons for that. The recession certainly didn't help, but there was a little bit of imbalance before that. And the state has changed the formula on us, but what they've really done is laid it all on the taxpayers. And our only request is that the state go back and look at it, because I think, in fairness, the employees should be contributing a little bit more. There's always been this balance between employer and employee contributions. We think that that should be maintained, and we would ask the legislature to go back and revisit that with respect to police and fire. So, thank you very much.
Laurence, Msall, remember this is the City Club, so let's avoid any love fest or my good friend and all those phrases.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I am Laurence Msall, the president of the Civic Federation. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out to hear about the city's budget and finances. Usually you have to go on public television or public radio or tune into various blog sites to hear about it. I'm very grateful for so many members of the Civic Federation who are here, as well as some of the staff who really do all the nuts and bolts of the research here for the Civic Federation. We agree with Gene. The city can do more with TIFs, but we can also do more with a lot of other areas. In all seriousness, Gene is a dedicated public servant. There are many dedicated public servants who are here today. The Civic Federation is not an anti-government, not an anti-tax organization. We believe in the potential of government. We also believe in the potential of evidence-based research to steer rational tax policy decisions. The city of Chicago is in horrible financial shape. The next mayor and the next city council are going to face an epic challenge in terms of not only stabilizing the city of Chicago's finances, but dealing with the budget deficit at the Chicago Public Schools, the Chicago Transit Authority. Throughout our overlapping governments, we have had a problem with spending more than we take in. The city of Chicago has had a structural deficit going back to 2007, when it was reported at about $100 million. Since that time, that deficit has grown. It has grown not just because the economy went through a downturn. It has grown because the city has continued to look for ways to spend more than the available revenues it had. From 2007 to 2011, we saw significant increases in the appropriations for the city government. The city deserves a lot of credit, as does Gene, for innovation. The Civic Federation strongly supported the privatization of the Skyway, as well as the privatization of the parking garages. We were not able to take a position on the parking meters because it passed so fast that we were unable to analyze the decision. Certainly, the public outcry over the parking meters privatization is going to be a challenge, not just for this administration, but the next administration. Looking at alternative service delivery, looking at how we can more efficiently deliver government services is going to have to be at the forefront of the City Council and the next mayor. The city has entered this great recession with inadequate reserves and no long-term financial plan. Job one for Mayor-elect Emanuel is going to be develop a long-term financial plan. We cannot go from one year to the next hoping that the recession is going to end, hoping that our revenues are going to bounce back to support the level of spending. While it is admirable that the city has some reserves left over from the parking meters and the Skyway privatization, the amount of money left is very small in comparison to the proceeds of just 5 years ago in terms of the total asset sales. That is not going to be available. The vast majority of it is not going to be available for the next administration. The pension crisis. The city's pensions are in trouble for 2 reasons. One, we have historically underfunded the pensions. Illinois funds its pensions much differently than every other state, and the city of Chicago participates in this, where we use an arbitrary, actuarial-based method of saying we will fund the pensions this year, as Gene said, based on a multiplier of what the employees contributed 2 years ago. That has nothing to do with the cost of those programs. As a result, in just 10 years, we saw the unfunded liabilities for the Chicago's major pension funds, the city pension funds, grow from approximately $2 billion to $12 billion. That is not going to be easily fixed. We are not going to close a $600 million deficit, and the reason why the deficit is projected to be in that magnitude is because last year, the city of Chicago identified a $650 million deficit in its budget and was able to identify about $100 million in structural changes. The vast majority of the closing mechanisms were one-time revenue sources that are going to be right at the forefront for the next mayor and the next administration. The city of Chicago is in beautiful shape from many of our perspectives because of a lot of the things that Mayor Daley did. Millennium Park, the promoting as an international destination, many things look great. All of us love this city. But this city is in very bad financial shape, one that is precariously close to being insolvent. The technical definition of insolvency is an inability to pay your obligations as they come due. When you have a 20-year track record of underfunding your pensions, when you have an almost 10-year track record of a structural budget deficit, you raise red flags as to your long-term financial health. That is not going to be sustainable going forward. Thank you.
As you walk out, we do have parting gifts for those of you who think this is just too much. Little vials of hemlock for those of you. And if you're elected official, you get a double. Mr. Hinz, the pride and joy of the lakefront, you're up.
Thank you, Paul. I know better than to get in a fight with a couple of numbers guys, so I'm not going to try to. Although, Gene, I would have to add that given the kind of numbers that have been coming out of the city the last couple of years, it's probably a good thing that people don't know who the budget director is. Enjoy your anonymity when you can get it.
And you applauded him ahead of time.
The situation is not very good. It's not. It's getting a little better than it was, and we're in extraordinary times. But I think Laurence is basically right. There's been a developing financial problem in this town for a while. It's not only on the expenditure side; it's on the unpaid obligation side, i.e., pensions, and it's on the debt side. If you look at what's happened to debt levels in the city of Chicago in the last 20 years, there was a price to this beautiful new central city we've built ourselves. In the core problem, and I think you see it in how the mix of city finances has changed through the years, is we used to have a system that pulled almost all of its money on the basis of taxes. A little bit of fee income on the side, mostly taxes. In the last 20, 25 years, that's changed dramatically. We get a very healthy percentage of the city budget income from fees, fines, and things of that nature. It tells me two things. The guys who run city government are politicians, and it's a lot easier to impose a fee or a fine on a parker or whatever than it is to impose a tax. People don't like taxes. But it also tells me that the city's core economy hasn't grown fast enough. You have to have something to be able to tax to pay off the bills. One of the more remarkable things that came out when a colleague of mine at Crane's, Steve Strahler, and I did a piece on the Daily by the Numbers about a year ago, was that there are actually fewer jobs in the city of Chicago than there were when Richard M. Daley took over. I think that kind of it boggled my mind a little bit, but it's true. The jobs we have, many of them are much better, but you have to have something to tax. So yeah, there's a problem. But like I said, I'm not going to get in this numbers fight. What I think is interesting is where does our new mayor come from in terms of solving this problem, and what kind of a team, particularly financially, has he put together to tackle those problems? I would say that Mr. Emanuel's core beliefs probably are pretty similar to Mr. Msall's, at least based on what he said publicly and privately. The day he announced, the day he won, a bunch of times beforehand and afterwards, he has said that the city's current financial situation is, quote, unsustainable. Can't keep doing what we're doing. Got to change things a lot. I think he really does believe that. A lot of things have been said about Rahm Emanuel. A lot more things have been said about him, good and bad. But one thing you can't dispute is the man knows money. He made money. He knows how to count. And I believe him when he says that changing what Chicago does is at the top of his list. Okay. Now, he's put together, we know almost all the major players now, just about everybody except Chief of Staff has been announced. An interesting team that is like the boss. It's hard-nosed, has a can-do attitude, a lot of corporate folks there, but there's a little interesting mix of politics there. This is still Chicago. We get to have politics when we pick cabinet officers. For instance, in picking the new head of hiring, the mayor picked the number 2 person in the Inspector General's office. I thought that was, as a political signal, that was absolutely brilliant, because it sends the sign that the days of, I'm not a patronage guy, we're going to do something different. And I'm putting a watchdog in charge of it to underline that point. The 3 folks who are going to lead city finances all are experienced in the corporate world, all have reputations. Mark Angelson was the CEO at R.R. Donnelly, had a reputation of busting heads, if need be. Lois Scott, who's going to be the chief financial officer, is a bond trader and financial advisor by reputation, but by profession. But she's put together her own firm, been very successful about it. And Alex Holt, who's going to take over as budget director, was the number 2 to Bill Abel, who was the reformer when he was budget director. There's a little politics in there too, though. Lois Scott, for instance, she built her firm, at least initially, in large part by becoming the top financial advisor to the state of Illinois on bond issues when Rod Blagojevich was governor. Not necessarily wrong with that. She and John Fallon, the state CFO, were buddies. But it shows a kind of a real-world politic that you're going to have here. You see that same type of corporate business experience mantra pretty much from top to bottom so far in the people this mayor has appointed. It kind of tells me where they're going. But you also see a Chicago politician at work. The new head of the CTA, Forrest Claypool, fine guy, did a good job at the Park District 15 or 20 years ago. Probably knows about as much about the CTA as I do. But there was a political debt there, and it was paid. So you have kind of an interesting mix. The question is, you've got a qualified team, fairly impressive team in place. The question then is, where do they go to take care of the numbers, to end the red ink? Mr. Emanuel has said that he's going to carve $75 million out of this year's budget. We're in the middle of this budget year. I believe him. His transition team seems to be working on that. You're clearly going to see some TIF reform, not because TIF money can be moved around as easily as everybody seems to think, and not because it's ripping off the schools. Gene is right about that. But because under this mayor, TIF became, it's like having a wad of cash in your back pocket. You shouldn't carry it around because invariably you know you're going to reach it and pull it out when maybe you shouldn't. TIF became much too much a mechanism to subsidize real estate development rather than to lure job creation. And I think you're going to see some changes on that score. Pensions is clearly going to be the tough one. It is increasingly the driver of all kinds of financial problems at every level of government. But I think you've seen some interesting things happen in the last 6 months. Up in Wisconsin, we all know what happened. You had a Republican governor, Republican legislature, and they decided to say, screw you to the unions. We're going to do what we want. We're not even going to bring you to the table. We'll see how that plays out. In comparison here, though, on the school question, you saw the unions wake up, see reality, and come up with some real changes. The school reform legislation that is pending in the House, and unless I'm wrong, is going to pass, has some real progress to it, and it was passed with the approval of the teachers' unions. I suspect you're going to see the same kind of progress on the pension side. Mike Madigan, the Speaker of the House, has made it very clear that the current situation in regard to employees who were on the payroll before January 1st, it's got to change. We can't afford what we've got. That's going to have clear and dramatic effects on the city's budget. The city itself will conduct some negotiations. That's clearly the thing to watch.
All right, Greg, give me one more of your best shot because we got a lot of questions here.
I will. The other thing we're talking about is what's going on with the city council. I think you've seen signal in the last couple of days the reality that it's not worth Rahm Emanuel's trouble to pick a big fight with Eddie Burke to throw him out, particularly if Eddie is willing to pledge his troth and promise to be a good boy and pretty much do what he's told. That will help this mayor in pushing through some of the tough things that I think we all agree he's going to have to push through.
Okay, now give him a round of applause. Yeah. Okay, Miss Ginny here is Catherine also, pardon the expression, working the room. There she is. If you have a question, two young ladies, just raise your hand and look at the questions. Ken Griffiths, who's been on a roll, Wolf Point Strategies. Now, Mr. Munin, I think you'll get this off the top of your head. No problem. No prize if you get it all right. Please quantify Chicago's revenue stream by percentage. That is sales tax, property tax, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the property tax doesn't go into the corporate fund. The property tax, $833 million, funds essentially pensions and debt service. So that doesn't come into the $3.3 billion corporate fund. Sales tax generates about $450 million out of the $3.3 billion. Income tax is in the $250 range. I'm sorry, what was the other one? Was there another one?
Keep going. Hold on.
Is this a quiz?
Federal grants.
Federal grants, we get about $2 billion in a year, so that's a substantial amount of money. By the way, give me an opportunity to say, because I had seen this mentioned before, that the city had balanced its operating budget with some of the stimulus money. That's absolutely not true. Very little of that came into what even could be considered the operating fund. We did get a COPS grant that funded about 86 police officers. But the rest of that was either capital, we did some street improvements with that, or it was social service programs that were not part of the operating fund.
Okay. Any comment? All right. This is from Joyce Saxon, Board of Governors. Will the consolidation of the fiscal departments really come to pass under the new mayor? Is consolidation in the air?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Don't all leap up. It is.
It is. Mr. Emanuel has already proposed, already made it clear he's going to have 3 or 4. Ms. Reyes' department is involved in one of them, where fleet management is going to be merged into general services. They've said the revenue department is going to report to the controller. I think that Mr. Emanuel thinks there's some money and improved efficiency to be found in putting departments together. And besides, it's good PR. As you take over to say, hey, I'm squishing these bureaucrats, I'm merging them together.
Clearly, reorganization and restructuring is the hallmark of almost every new administration. And certainly, as Greg says, the new administration has stated that they think there's savings by consolidating the agencies. An even bigger question is, what about consolidating of our governments? What about, whether we have too much government that we can't afford? I think another thing that didn't come up that I would want to point out is Springfield is not going to be the place where the mayor-elect Emanuel is going to be able to go and find new large buckets of money. The state of Illinois has its own epic financial crisis even after the tax increase, and it's still struggling to stabilize its budget. For those of us who follow local government, it was very surprising to see the state of Illinois pass its income tax increase and not share any of that increase with the local governments. Traditionally, the local governments had received most of the income tax increases that were done in the past, and currently at about 10%. None of the new income tax money is going anywhere except to help stabilize the state's existing budget.
There is one, I have to add to that, there is one pot of money potentially out there that we need to talk about, and that's casino gambling. You haven't read a word about it recently, have you? Maybe that ought to tell you something.
So we should know what's going on.
Don't hold back now, come on.
My gut tells me there's a deal cooking, but we'll see.
Sure. Now,
although the Civic Federation doesn't have a position on gambling, and although we were founded by Jane Addams and Bertha Palmer, some legendary social reformers, let me just make one comment about the constant attraction of gambling as the source of funding our governments. In addition to being completely unreliable as a revenue source, and we've seen a steady decline, not just in Illinois, but across the country, if you took the state's entire take on all the casinos that we have, all the riverboat casinos, it's approximately $500 million. That does not close. If the state should one day wake up and give us the biggest casino we could ever imagine, and it generates the equivalent of what all of the state's casinos provide, you couldn't close the city's financial deficit with a casino alone.
Yeah, but you could, sir, pardon the expression, cut into it.
Again, without having a position, I think it's also important to recognize that there are significant social costs that need to be measured.
All right, Bert, your question's coming up pretty soon. By the way, that's the first time I think I've ever heard Jane Addams and Bertha Palmer's names in the same sentence, but that's okay. We move on.
They were good friends.
If you go to the Art Institute and you go to the Impressionists, they were all hanging in Bertha's living room. It's good when you marry Potter Palmer. I'll stop with the history lesson right there. Okay, Graham Grady, one throwaway and one legit. I'll give you both. The throwaway. What will be the economic impact of a Hawks and Bulls win on Tuesday night? Yeah, all that. Anyone have stock in either club? You do. Good. Otherwise, make a few bucks off it. we really have to start worrying about all these millionaires, whether the season will go on. I'm really there. I'm out selling streetwise just to make sure that they can do that. Now comes the legitimate question.
By the way, we get $175,000 about for each home game that the Blackhawks and Bulls have. So,
any truth to the rumor that you guys make sure it goes 7 games? Yeah. All right, moving.
No comment.
Now you know why I got this position. All right, serious. This is a very good question. How much can be gained and/or saved if Mayor-elect Manuel refinances, here's the key word, all of the city's debt?
We'd probably need Gene Saffold here to answer the question. I mean, we have been refinancing debt as it comes due. I would analogize it to the person who takes advantage of lower interest rates and gets a new 30-year mortgage. So again, in the best of times, would you do precisely that? Probably not. But it's all, as they say, net present value neutral. In other words, it's responsible. It's responsible restructuring. We have $6 billion of general obligation debt. Some of it's been refinanced, so I don't think, and we're already getting favorable, rates on that. So we take a look at that every year, and we see what portion of our existing debt profile can be refinanced, and I'm sure we will do that again this year.
Beyond that, the moment in the market where debt was cheapest and affordability, easy money was to be made, may have passed. If anything, I think the markets are looking toward an increase in interest rates in the next 12 months, not a decrease.
Okay. Well, before I ask the next question, you have to go back to that $175,000. That come from taxes on the tickets, or?
That's the amusement tax, yes.
All right.
And what is every White Sox game worth, if they win?
Not much.
And does the 175 all get eaten up in the cost of extra police and services?
No, actually it doesn't. The police department has worked very hard to streamline the number of police officers and traffic control aides that are out there, and they have been reimbursing us for that as well. So there's an agreement that we struck with the sports teams years ago. So no, that's money, and that doesn't account. I mean, the sales tax and liquor tax and that is kind of incremental. It doesn't add that much to it, but it's a good thing. I think with respect to the Blackhawks last year, it was about $1.5 million for all the home games that they had. So we will take it.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that. All right, former Alderman Notaris. Why doesn't the city put up for auction all real estate it owns as it doesn't need put back on the tax rolls? In other words, I guess foreclosed places and stuff. And you got a constituent from the Realty Association right up there. Mr. Bernardoni, yes. Go ahead.
Well, real estate isn't worth a lot out there right now. So, I mean, we do sell property that is valuable when we can. We have, I think, 19,000 vacant lots. Not a lot of people are saying, can we buy all those vacant lots from you? So we do aggressively market the real estate that has some value, and we try and maintain the property that we have that does not have value. The market will turn around. It's actually better than it was before. I mean, just
Sell it for $1.
Sell it for $1.
To sell it. Nobody wants it for $1, Alderman. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. People are not interested in vacant property on the west side. It's just not. There's not a market for it right now. But as I said, the real estate market is turning around a little bit. Our real property transfer tax, which is a component part on one of these charts over here, I think over here, is one of the taxes that dropped dramatically. We peaked at about $240 million. We went down to about $60 million in 2009, 2010. Now it's coming back a little bit. And so it's probably hopeful that in the not too distant future we'll be generating more out of that. And then our real estate portfolio might also become more valuable and we can get rid of property at that time.
Gene, one follow-up to that. I continue to hear from candidates that there's really no central inventory, no database where, say, industrial buyers, folks who are interested in setting up a factory, there's no place for them to go where they can find out easily if there's 25 or 30 acres available someplace. What's the state of the city's ability to just put the information there so that people can come and shop online?
Well, with that much property, it is a challenge to keep track of it all. But if I'm not mistaken, and I'm almost positive of this, we have a list of every piece of property on the web. Norma and Chris say it's on the web, so there it is. I mean, I've printed it out before, and I've taken a look at it, and so it's there. I don't know how difficult it is to navigate through it, but I assume it's searchable, so it is there.
And not all of it is owned by the city. So when you have large tracts of property, like on the west side, one of the difficult things for developers is assembling those many different portions of land. So you might need 6 or 7 parcels with 6 or 7 different owners in order to get a big enough parcel for that development. I think this points to something that I think is going to be a very big challenge for Mayor-elect Emanuel and the next city council is what is the vision of Chicago? What is our economic development strategy going forward? We cannot sustain this infrastructure as we have seen with a shrinking population and a shrinking job base. The last census was not kind to Chicago, and that is something that has to be at everyone's, the forefront of everyone's thinking in terms of economic development.
Far be it for the moderator to jump in, but just remember, when the city of Chicago was viewed as this terrible place with all this corruption, the city was growing. Ever since we hit the age of reform, the city is dwindling. Take that, Alderman Moore. You know, I mean, there may be something beyond what's being said. You know, maybe we got to start talking about Hinky Dink and Bathhouse John and less about Jane Addams and Bertha Palmer. Because you know, with 19,000 vacant lots, Hinky Dink alone would have had 20 to maybe 30% of those filled with ghost voters. I mean, at least have been off the rolls. All right. How about a big round of applause? Not for me, but for these gentlemen.